Hello, friends. Welcome to the Alabama Liberal Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about 15 years, if you can believe it, since I started AlabamaLiberal.com. Where does the time go? Late night nostalgia and the death of media that I care about. So 2011, the website of Alabama Liberal begins February 7th of that year, a date that will live in infamy. The Tea Party wave of 2010 had just taken over, and a few months later I started this as a response to that. 5 full years went by where it was pretty much just text. It was just the blog itself, and of course AlabamaLiberal.com is still available. There's still a lot of stuff posted there that doesn't make audio or visual format. But then in 2016, start the podcast, and then I start the YouTube channel of Alabama Liberals. Now, video, audio, and text for people to ignore. There's now 3 methods for you to ignore me with. There might only be 1 or 2 episodes a year in between the seasons. And so the last episode was a year ago. Luckily, there hasn't been any news between now and then. Nothing's really been happening. Things have been pretty slow and quiet, so I hadn't missed out on too much. And of course, that's true if you've been in a coma, if you're Rip Van Winkle and you fell asleep and have just now woken up, which apparently half the country's doing that. They're just totally zoning out the news and not following it. And it's never been easier to do that because of our media. Every day, the news gets worse. I could do 1 episode right now, an hour-long episode about just the shit that's went wrong today. And you could do that every single day of the second regime. If I tried to cover everything that happened in the last year, it would be a 100-hour miniseries. Trump declares tomorrow there's going to be tariffs on heaven. God is very disrespectful to me. God is totally out of line. Me and the devil, we had a nice talk. I think me and the devil, we're going to have a good trade agreement. That could be the headline. Trump hammers out a trade agreement with hell. The devil's with him at the podium. He's a misunderstood guy. We both have that in common. The media is very unfair to us. God, you better watch your step because I don't like the way you're talking to me. Very disrespectful. Daily, we get these stories that sound like you're making them up. I mean, only a few days ago, he was talking about his bunker that he's going to put a drone port on top of it where he can surveil the entire city of Washington, D.C., and there's going to be a sniper's nest on the top of this ballroom so that snipers can see for miles around and nobody can get close to the White House. Does this sound ominous to anybody? It's where he can live as he ends the world and live in that bunker with his closest associates. And he talks about there'll be military capabilities from the bunker in the ballroom. He can run the military from there. He can have snipers on the top of the building so nobody can get near. For miles around, he can launch drones all over the city to surveil stuff. Does that sound concerning? Does that sound like a red flag? And we're solely focused on the corruption of it, the $1 billion ballroom that initially was going to be a few $1,000,000 and private donors were going to cover that. Oh, now it's going to be $1 billion and the taxpayers are going to cover it. Whoops, looks like we lied to you for the 100,000th time. Sorry about that, guys. As we do a $1.8 billion slush fund that I'm going to oversee, and I can basically steal the entirety of that money. And as Don and Eric, Uday and Kusei, as Stephen Colbert called them a few episodes ago, of course we're going to talk about that, but that's very accurate. They have bought drone companies that are now getting contracts through the Pentagon for the Iran war. They've now skipped the middleman. For the first year, it looked like they just wanted to shake down private businesses. They just wanted the $16 million bribe from Paramount. Of course, that's going to be talked about. And then they got a multi-billion-dollar merger approved, so it worked out for all involved. But he just wanted to shake down tech and media for little amounts of money here and there. Rupert Murdoch lawsuit, or maybe Google donates $1 million to the inauguration. People that have asked, why does business put up with this shit? Why are they going along with it and giving him what he wants? It's very obvious. They are benefiting 100 times over from whatever token amounts they give him. If Amazon donates $1 million to the inauguration fund, and then Jeff Bezos over with Blue Origin, which is dependent on government contracts, can get billions worth of government contracts, well, isn't that worth it? If Google donates $1 million to the inauguration fund, and then they can get the Justice Department under him, which is the most partisan Justice Department we have ever seen, ever. If they can get an antitrust lawsuit that could cost them billions, if they can get that dismissed, well, isn't that worth it? Meta's making the same calculations. Apple's making the same calculations. Of course, Paramount made the same calculation when they gave him a $16 million bribe, and then they got a multi-billion-dollar merger approved. That obviously benefited them to do that. When law firms and universities and private business, especially private business and the oligarchy, are not pushing back on him as hard as they could, I think that mystifies people, and it's really because they're getting a lot of favors and kickbacks. It's basically a pay-for-play system. It's a bribery syndicate. When John Ossoff, the fantastic senator from Georgia and Senate candidate this year, please reach out to your Georgia voters and citizens and remind them to vote for John Ossoff. But when he calls it the Mar-a-Lago Mafia, that is dead on, that it is the Mar-a-Lago Mafia. It is a shakedown racket with Trumpolini and his family at the top. Beyond the obvious corruption, which is scary, what is the other purpose of this stuff? The $1.8 billion fund looks like what I talked about a few episodes ago. I believe it was the first episode when he took office, and I said it looks very much like he's building his own paramilitary. When he pardons the January 6 rioters, and now he wants to pay these people. What the fuck are they owed money for? If I shoot somebody and I get away with that through some technicality, or I get that thrown out, does the President of the United States, here's $1 million, sorry for your trouble. Really, my bad that you were prosecuted for a crime. They committed a crime. They caught these people dead to rights. He threw out their convictions and pardoned them because of a partisan move. But did they do something wrong? Yeah, they did. So what the fuck are they talking about? Unjust prosecutions. Of course they should have been prosecuted. Well, how about a back rub, boss? How about a steak dinner? How about you bring over some lobster tails and shit? I mean, what's he going to do next? Roll out the red carpet for him? So that looks like a paramilitary, and the ballroom looks like a Vladimir Putin-esque bunker where he can hide in. And this goes back to what happened in 2020. The past is always prologue. You never can look at events just right now. There's always a context for them. A nearly forgotten event that happened in summer of 2020. Funny when I bring it up, and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I guess that did kind of happen. And I think it was as much to do with COVID as anything. People had been under lock and key in their house for months. It didn't look like the president gave a shit. He was too busy trying to steal an election to really focus on COVID. People came to the gates of the White House and they were rattling the gates, and Trump hid down in the basement. A lot of people have kind of forgotten about this, because so much has happened in the last 6 years. But I think this event looms very large in his mind. I think it plays on a loop, because again, this is somebody vindictive as hell. Look at how he's gone after James Comey. Look at how he repeatedly wants to file charges against people he perceives as his enemies. Look at how Jeff Sessions, the Alabama senator, the first person to ever endorse him in the Senate, the first major politician really to endorse Trump in 2016. You'd think Trump felt like he owed him, put him as AG, but just because Sessions recused himself, which he should have done, but just because he followed the law, look at how much Trump hates him and berated him for the 2 years that he had left before he could fire him immediately after the midterms. Like the day after the midterms, like, you gotta fucking pack your shit and get out of here. He pulled a Don Draper. He's like, I want you to find a box and put your shit in it. Jeff Sessions runs for the Senate a couple years later, and Trump actively campaigns against him. Alabamians get stuck with Tommy Tuberville, the worst senator that we've had yet, and now could be the worst governor that we could have. We'll talk about that, of course. But you get stuck with Tommy Tuberville, all because why? He hates Jeff Sessions. And why does he hate him? Just because he recused himself. It was funny to me when I saw he endorsed Ken Paxton over John Cornyn, and a lot of the Senate Republicans were like, this is outrageous. Who could have ever predicted a guy that fucked over General Mattis, General Kelly, Rex Tillerson, Bill Barr, his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, his personal friend, Anthony Scaramucci, his loyalist lapdog vice president, Mike Pence, Jeff Sessions, the first major politician to endorse him, Mo Brooks, one of his January the 6th co-conspirators, every wife that he's ever had, Marjorie Taylor Greene, everybody who was dumb enough to apply to his university, everybody who was dumb enough to give money to his charity, the thousands of workers that have sued him for not paying them properly, the thousands of lawsuits from vendors and contractors who've had to take him to court, his own family members of his siblings that he fucked out of their trust. Who could imagine a guy who's fucked over everybody who's ever had the misfortune to know him would also do that to Senate Republican 4006? Just like he did Kevin McCarthy, the guy who resurrected his political career after January the 6th, and he didn't give a shit about him. Or Mitch McConnell, the guy who probably prevented him from being convicted in the Senate and then stripped from ever running again and ever being president again. Wow, I can't believe all the people that he's turned on in the past who have done personal favors for him and helped his rise to the polls, including Rupert Murdoch, the runner of his own personal propaganda station, and Elon Musk, the guy who gave him $250 million in the 2024 elections. I can't believe if he would fuck them over, he would also do it to John Cornyn. I am shocked. See his vindictiveness and the fact that he can't let things go ever. Of course he remembers 2020, hiding in the damn bunker, rioters rattling the gates, and this scares me because him trying to get to a bunker that is heavily fortified and protected, it kind of looks like the Phantom of the Ballroom, like he plans to live under the ballroom and just haunt the halls. And do people in the non-subterranean levels of the White House, do they just go about their business and say, well, he's locked himself down there and he's got 2 years worth of McDonald's hamburgers and some freeze-dried steak that he's going to be eating. Leave him down there. You just cut off all of the communications to the military that he's got down there, and then he just calls up who he thinks is Fox News, and it's a line to nowhere, and just screams at them all day. I don't know. That could happen. When I see a corrupt Supreme Court majority, 6 obscurantist hyper-Catholic dickheads sitting on the Supreme Court conservative majority, and they want to do things like overturn Roe versus Wade, Medicaid, gut the Voting Rights Act, turn back the clock on EPA regulations, basically get rid of them, act like they don't exist. These 6 conservative justices, all of them are hyper-partisan hacks. All of them are thinking more like Republican Party operatives than actual Supreme Court justices. 5 out of the 6 were appointed by presidents who did not win the popular vote the first time they ran. 4 out of those 5 are in ethics scandals. Even recently you had John Roberts, who everybody talks about, oh, he's the institutionalist and he's a man of integrity. Why do you say that? Because he looks like he's pinching off a loaf every time they show a photo of him. Like he looks like he's taking a dump and grimacing. He's constipated. He looks like a serious man. He's cosplaying as a serious man. And you think that makes him one? He's not an institutionalist. He's making money hand over fist on the Supreme Court. His wife is an equity partner at a D.C. law firm. He has overseen hundreds of cases that this firm has brought before the Supreme Court. But him saying, my wife didn't work on those cases. It doesn't fucking matter. She's an equity partner. If the firm makes money and the firm gets more business and the firm wins cases and they get bonuses, she gets those bonuses, whether she worked on the case or not. She's an equity partner. He should have recused himself, and that's an impeachable offense, along with what Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas have done. So you now have a Supreme Court where it's minority rule. They were appointed by presidents who didn't win the popular vote, and they were confirmed by a Senate where millions more voted for Democratic senators over Republican ones. And now these people are going to sit on the court for a lifetime appointment, and they're going to make decisions the majority of people don't agree with. No other country has lifetime appointments for their Supreme Court judges. When you look at the average tenure of a Supreme Court judge in other countries, the second longest one is Norway, at about half the length of us. We're at about 28 years is the average tenure of a Supreme Court justice this century. In Norway, it's about 14 years. Our judges serve an absurd amount of time. And then to have them overrule things where 80% of the population agrees with the left, not the right, yeah, it looks like tyranny of the minority. And the entire system looks that way from the top down. But we're not seeing this when we're talking about media discussions. So the very last part of the equation that's supposed to be represented by the people, the one that's supposed to balance it out from a Senate where Illinois, New York, and California are outvoted by the Dakotas, Alaska, and Wyoming. But say, well, that makes up for it in the House. Not really, when the Senate has more power than the House. But even in the House, we now see districts being gerrymandered within an inch of their life, and the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. In the Southeast, if you look at how the racial breakdown is, almost every Democratic congressperson is black, and almost every Republican congressperson is white. Almost that way, I would say more than 95% of the time, it flows that way. So when they have things like gutting the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, of course that's going to wind up being very partisan. They're going to gerrymander black districts out of existence. And these states already had horrible records of gerrymandering. If you have presidents who didn't win the popular vote, and then they appoint SCOTUS justices, and then those are confirmed by senators who didn't get more votes, and then the SCOTUS justices can go back and say, well, population doesn't matter for the House. They can redraw these maps however the hell they want to. Estimates are that Democrats have to get about 10 million more votes just to get a 1 or 2 seat advantage because of the way these maps are going to be redrawn. Oh wow, this is just blatant corruption. And this is blatantly a system where the minority is ruling, and they're using every tool at their disposal to do that. Even statewide races are going to be hurt by this, where you think, well, you can't gerrymander a statewide race. Well, you kind of can if the governor's doing things like throwing out hundreds of thousands of voters between now and the election time. This was the goal, is they want to disenfranchise the vote. They want to control who gets to vote, who doesn't get to vote. The whole thing about American democracy is 80% of people, they don't really approve of a president charging us $2 billion for the privilege of sitting over a bullshit fund that he makes up. We want to vote against this. Well, that would have been good 2 years ago, but now we've changed the rules where you can't vote anymore. Obviously, you begin to see the problem with minority rule, where our votes don't matter anymore and they're being overruled. And you begin to see the problem in the media's coverage of these events. This is all about media and media portrayals. This is the real topic of conversation, and it's more relevant now than it's ever been. For one example would be the gerrymandering fights. I'm seeing the media cover this as like, well, both sides are equally bad at gerrymandering. No. If you look to the map of each state by gerrymandering, and they would be given grades. If nonpartisan people looked at that, they would give like California a B, New York a B, Washington an A, Minnesota an A, Massachusetts an A. Almost every single blue state other than Illinois got a good grade when it came to gerrymandering. I think Illinois had like a D or something like that. But almost every other blue state, it was positive for gerrymandering. The red state states had terrible grades to begin with. Ohio and Florida and Texas, they were all like D's and F's. And so almost every red state where it was even possible to gerrymander, I think the only red states that had positive grades were states like Wyoming. One congressional person for the entire state. Only one congressperson for the entire state. Basically the same voters as the governor would have. They got positive grades, but out of states like the Southeast or Ohio, states that even possibly could have gerrymandered, they already had dismal, and I mean dismal grades. So that was one instance where they actually weren't equally bad, or both parties weren't doing the same thing. Democratic states went out of their way not to gerrymander, because guess what? Gerrymandering didn't really benefit them. If you actually proportioned the districts fairly, they usually wound up better off. When Republicans did stacking and cracking, splitting a black district in half, or packing, where they would put the black part of Birmingham and the black part of Montgomery that are hundreds of miles apart, they'd put them in the same congressional district so that you got one majority black district instead of two. Stuff like that benefited them. So Republicans were all about gerrymandering to begin with. So when Trumpolini comes in there and he's like, Texas needs to gerrymander, Indiana needs to gerrymander, Ohio needs to gerrymander, Florida needs to gerrymander, these states were already horribly gerrymandered. And what's happening now with the Democratic states, they're just trying to fight fire with fire. They're just trying to be like, okay, they're going to do that. We're just going to match them. If Texas gets 4 new seats, California's going to get 4 new seats. If Indiana gets a new seat, Virginia will get a new seat. But what we're finding is most of the blue states had put in provisions that would make it much harder for them to gerrymander. They wanted an independent commission to put this in. Red states have never done that. So once again, you're seeing where blue states made it harder for themselves and the Democrats to amass power. What's another good example of that? The jungle primary in California. This primary is insane. What should be happening is a Democratic side and a Republican side. On the Republican side, Steve Hilton would win, and then he would go on in November and probably get wiped out. But on the Democratic side, you'd have either Tom Steyer, Xavier Becerra, or Katie Porter. 2 of them would probably go to a runoff, and then in 6 weeks we'd get to vote on that, and that'd be fine. And whoever won that would probably blow out Steve Hilton in November. Instead, with a jungle primary, what looked like it could have happened for months was the Democrats, there were about 10 of them that were either 1% or higher in the polls. They'd split so much of the vote that Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco could go on to face each other in November. 80% of the state wouldn't support either one of these guys. Those would be the choices because of this stupid jungle primary. Who put that shit in? Arnold Schwarzenegger, the last Republican governors. So this is a case where even a so-called moderate Republican, he allows terrible things to happen to the state. And he really did a lot of damage in the few years that he was governor. When Jerry Brown took over from him, the state was 6 months from insolvency. It was about to go bankrupt because he didn't know how to manage anything. And of course, he believed in the Republican economics that don't work. So Jerry Brown had to come in and fix a budget deficit. That's true for most of the Democratic transitions from a Republican. When Democratic presidents take over, they take over an enormous amount of debt that Republicans have run up. Do you hear this in the media? That Trump has run up the most massive debt that we have ever seen. And when Democrats take over in 2029, and I'm convinced just about any Democratic person could be the nominee, I'm convinced I could win if I were the nominee. Just about any Democrat you could think of could be the nominee and win. But when they take over, will there be any money for them to do anything? When people talk about, well, we need a single payer system, there's no money for that. Why is there no money for that? Because Republicans ran up the massive debt that they did. This happened when Joe Biden took over. This happened when Barack Obama took over. This happened when Bill Clinton took over. They run up these massive debts. Barack Obama needs a new office chair. Oh my God, there's no money in the budget for that shit. For the people that defend Trump and shit on Obama constantly, if Obama set up a fund where he could take $2 billion from taxpayers, can you really tell me that Barack Obama wouldn't be in handcuffs? The Tea Party formed weeks after Obama took office, and they insisted he had no money to do anything, and the debt was a big deal. When Trump took over in 2016, the Tea Party's disbanded. We don't need it anymore. Whatever he does is fine. He wants to give $1 trillion tax cut we can't afford. That's fine. That's cool. Who cares? And the same thing keeps happening over and over. Do you see the media making that case that Republicans run up massive deficits and always have a recession? There hasn't been a Republican president since Rutherford B. Hayes who has served a full term and not had a recession. Why is that? Well, it just works out that way. You can't time the market forces. When Trump takes over an economy from Obama or Biden, he's a genius. The stock market's roaring. Unemployment's down. The first year of his term, he's such a genius. Look at the economy, how great it's doing when he inherits it from somebody else. Then when he tanks it, in the first term, COVID and a massive tax cut that nobody needed that gave rich people even more money to put us out of a job with, that wasn't his fault. That was just COVID. I mean, what are you talking about? Same to 2008. I mean, come on. Bush couldn't be responsible for that. Reagan and H.W. Bush, they weren't responsible for that recession. None of them have ever been responsible for the Great Depression under Hoover or the Great Recession under W. Bush or Trump's COVID mistakes or now that Trump has been there for only about a year and a half, and he's done tariffs, and he started the Iran war, and inflation is sky high, and he's blown a huge hole in the deficit with $1 trillion going to a tax cut that is completely unnecessary for the people who are receiving it, while all of our taxes go up. Who pays for the tax cuts? I don't see the media make that case either. When they talk about a tax cut, they mean for Musk, Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. That's who the tax cut's for. Our taxes go up. Our effective tax rate since the Reaganites started in the 1980s of trickle down, trickle down, trickle down, middle class, lower class, and working class people, their taxes have gone up, not down. For the bulk of the country, tax rates have gone up. For the rich people, they have plummeted. There is no such thing as a tax cut. It's a tax redistribution from the top to the bottom. The top taxes go down, the bottom's taxes go up to fucking cover what the top people should be paying. When they say things like capping Social Security taxes, the first $250,000 a year that you make, that's the Social Security cap. So somebody could make $25 billion and only the first $250,000 of that is subject to Social Security taxes. But then it makes the program insolvent. And so people are saying, oh, we don't have any money in Social Security for 10 years. Should we lift the Social Security tax cap that Reagan put in? What do you think? Well, of course you should. But if they don't, then the millions of people that rely on that program, their Social Security could dry up. That becomes a tax on them, while the top 0.0001% of earners, it's a tax cut for them and a tax increase for most people. Do you ever see this case made in the media? People breaking this down, talking about this? Of course not. Why is that? Look what's happened to the media and look who controls it. So when they talk about a so-called liberal media, anybody now saying that today, and you've got my permission to punch them square in the face, because that might be all it's going to take to wake them up. Wake them up however you can. I don't know how you can reach these people at this point, because they may be too far gone, they might be brain dead, but a liberal media does not exist in 2026. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Last year, he fired Karen Atia for talking a little bit about Charlie Kirk and just trying to properly frame his legacy as to what it actually was. They fired her. She was the last black opinion columnist at the Washington Post. He's fired almost all the liberals, or most of them have quit. So Bezos has made the Washington Post right wing. The LA Times, this is the second biggest city in America, and its number one newspaper, the LA Times, is owned by a conservative billionaire who's from South Africa, and he would not let them endorse Kamala Harris. And if you look at the LA Times, it's pathetic. I mean, they don't talk about hardly anything worth talking about. You look at CNN, which is part of Warner Brothers, they've already fired several people that Trump wanted gone. Jim Acosta and people like that. There's already been a gutting of the network. If the Ellisons are allowed to control Warner Brothers, they will control HBO, which I'm assuming they'll fire John Oliver. I'm assuming that'd be the first person. And then CNN, where Trump's already got a list of people that he wants gone. Something like Fox News, obviously very conservative. It's as powerful as it's ever been. Rupert Murdoch, they say, well, he sold a lot of his Fox assets to Disney. All they sold was the film studio, the FX cable network, and a stake in Hulu. But what does Fox still control? Not only Fox News, but the Fox broadcasting stations. 4 major broadcasters, ABC, Fox, NBC, and CBS. Fox is still controlled by the Murdoch family. CBS is now controlled by the Ellisons. David Ellison and Larry Ellison were allowed to acquire Paramount. This gives them control of the 4th or 5th biggest film studio in the country, all of the Paramount cable properties, so stuff like CMT, MTV, VH1, BET. Imagine that. A guy who's basically a white supremacist, and when he took over Paramount, he immediately laid off thousands of black employees, now controls BET. And of course, CBS, where they're allowed to push out somebody like Stephen Colbert. This late night institution that's been around since I was younger than my children are now, they just push it off the air. This thing that's been on for 30 odd years. And people who grew up with Letterman, and then the new generation going up with Colbert, and the next generation, you'd hope they'd grow up with whoever replaced Colbert in a few years, but it just gone. 2 of the 4 major broadcasters, Fox and CBS, are under Republican control. Half of the major newspapers in America are under Republican control. Most of the cable news is under Republican control. What about stuff that's supposedly liberal? I guess this would now include NBC and ABC. NBC is so fucking scared of Trump, they spun off their cable channel, MSNBC, and it's now been rebranded to MS Now. First, they do things like fire Joy Reid, the only black woman that had a primetime show on MSNBC. She was fired almost immediately after Trump took office. And then they spin the entire cable channel off into MS Now and its own separate cable division. So it's now got probably 1/10 of the resources that it did have have at one time. So that's what NBC's done. They've defamed Jimmy Fallon, and Jimmy Fallon is now one step above Bill Maher and Greg Gutfeld in terms of late night hosts that are conservative. And then ABC, which is, I guess, now the de facto liberal media company, which is pretty sad because ABC and Disney are not liberal media companies, but they've been forced into that position because Republicans have tried to hammer them so hard and put them in an ideological box. They were willing to cancel Jimmy Kimmel until there was so much hell raised about it, they brought it back. Now that Stephen Colbert is off the air, all of the hatred will go towards Kimmel. There won't be enough people splitting it anymore, and in 1 or 2 years he could be gone. Even in the case where you have a media board, so the board for Disney at one point had Ike Perlmutter on it and other conservatives, and they were constantly pushing Disney to be more conservative. I don't think you can really say this is a liberal media company, and even if it was, look at the broadcasters. When you get down to the affiliates, which still matter for ABC and NBC, even if the companies themselves skew slightly more liberal than conservative companies like CBS and Fox, the broadcasters and the TV affiliates are raging conservatives because you have Sinclair Media and other companies at the TV affiliate level. That's what pushed it for Kimmel. The revolt from the affiliate people like Sinclair Broadcasting were like, oh, we got to get rid of Kimmel and we won't put him on, and over here in Kansas City or whatever markets they control, we're going to show Byron Allen reruns or whatever it is, and they'll put something on like, oh, how about a Family Feud rerun instead? And so they're deliberately trying to stop the message of Kimmel getting out and force ABC to get rid of him. So they can do that at the TV affiliate level and the board level with people like Ike Perlmutter, who was a big Disney executive, and he got into it with Iger and they pushed him out, but there could easily be somebody else like that. Somebody like Bill Ackman can come in and buy a 12% stake of Disney tomorrow and try to influence them that way. These are public companies. Something like PBS, Trump has gutted the funding for PBS. What liberal media? If the New York Times is the most liberal media outfit in the country and they really just cover stories, and this is a New York Times where Brett Stevens, John McWhorter, and Ross Dohat, they still work, and Bari Weiss got her start there. Bari Weiss wrote for the New York Times as an opinion columnist, then she went to Substack, and I swear to God, her Substack was about the same level as Alabama Liberal. Really and truly, I've been running Alabama Liberal for 15 years, and I had about the same level of experience that Bari Weiss did to take over CBS News. If NBC News said, you know who we should put in charge of NBC News? This guy, Alabama Liberal, man. This guy knows what time it is, and we're going to put him in charge of NBC News. Republicans would be screaming. They would say, he's not qualified. He doesn't know what he's doing. This guy's not experienced enough. He's a pure partisan hack. There's no way that this could happen. So imagine the reaction to that, because the equivalent of putting me in charge of NBC News was putting Bari Weiss in charge of CBS News. She's not a journalist. She doesn't come from that background. She's an opinion columnist who ran a Substack, and then is now in charge of stuff like 60 Minutes, the finest TV news program in the country. Well, not much longer, but 60 Minutes, she's in charge of shit like that. Real journalists have to go to her and be like, hey, what do you think of this story? Well, I don't know. That is ridiculous. What did they do to CBS News? They took Tony DeCoppel, or whatever the fuck his name is. I don't even want to look it up. I don't even want to learn it. But I know when I used to flip around the morning channels and CBS Mornings, whenever that guy would speak, you might watch it for Gayle King or whoever, but he'd be there. Whenever he'd open his mouth, it was pretty obvious he was a Republican. So in 2024, the last year that Biden was president, whenever Tony DeCoppoli, or Tony Deuce is what I really call him, whenever he would speak, I'd be like, oh, that guy's a Republican. And then when Trump won, I thought, well, watch him put Tony Deuce as the CBS nightly news anchor. And they did. And I thought, oh my God. But when he took over, I thought, well, Tony Deuce will have a job because he's quite obviously a Republican. And they put him in charge of that because he looks the part and he's conservative leaning. Over at the New York Times, you have John McWhorter, who is basically Clarence Thomas. I mean, this guy talks about wokeism and censorship, and he's probably the most black suspicious black person in the media today. I mean, it is kind of crazy the shit that he writes at a time when the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act is being gutted. You think, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I mean, what's the matter with you? And I see some of the stuff he writes and thinks, okay, that guy's on a different planet. Right beside him, you've got Brett Stevens, who is a nut. He didn't endorse Kamala Harris, and he would not endorse her because of questions about Israel. You read his columns and you think, okay, I'm not anti-Zionist. I'm not on the same page as a lot of liberals where they're anti-Israel and anti-Zionist, but I read his columns and think, I feel Netanyahu could blow up Times Square and Stevens would find a way to justify it somehow. Of course, I've seen him on Real Time for years and years, and he's very much in that right-wing cocktail circuit bubble of the right-wing intellectuals that don't really exist, and they haven't for a while, and he still maybe thinks that they do, and so he's really on a different planet. And then worst of all, Ross Dohat, a Catholic supremacist who is a nut, left, and they won't get rid of him, and they let him interview all these people, and you think, okay, so this is the most liberal organization in the country, and half the people writing columns for them are either conservative or ex-conservatives like David French. Even when you go over to MS Now, okay, they can fire Joy Reid, but Nicole Wallace is there, Michael Steele is there. There's a lot of ex-Republicans over on MS Now, and I think, what does it say that the so-called liberal alternative to Fox News, half the people there were people that helped build the infrastructure for Trump because they either worked for W. Bush or they were the RNC chairperson or they helped the Tea Party and W. Bush, which of course lays the seeds for Trump. You can't come out of nowhere and have somebody like Trump. It was years, decades of Republicans laying the trail for that. And they're over there telling liberals how they should vote and all this shit. I think, you don't fucking know anything. I've been Alabama liberal even before it started in 2011. I've been it since I was a kid, literally a kid. I was Democratic and everybody around me was Republican in Alabama. Not everybody, but a lot of people. Because the part I'm from in Alabama, it's not Birmingham or Mobile or Montgomery. It's the Appalachian Mountains between Huntsville and Birmingham. It's funny because I didn't really know this. I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast, but I'm from Appalachia because I didn't know it. What happened was, and this is maybe interesting to you, J.D. Vance and Andy Beshear were trading barbs about who's real Appalachia, who's authentic, who's a real mountain man. And Andy Beshear's like, he's not real, he's not from this part. And J.D. Vance is like, he's not real, his dad was the governor and he was wealthy. And I looked it up and I thought, what is considered Appalachia? And Sand Mountain, the part that I'm from, that is in the northern part of the state, is technically part of the Appalachian Mountain. Now, I don't think of myself as being Appalachian because you picture that image and you see people with like jugs and they're blowing into a jug and they're having a hootenanny, they're playing a banjo with 3 strings or some shit. I don't think of it being that way because it really wasn't that way. We had running water and a Walmart. I mean, it wasn't really like that rural necessarily. Marshall County has got 100,000 residents in it. So I don't think of it as being that rural necessarily, but technically I am from the Appalachian Mountains. So you're watching these guys trading barbs and it's like, okay, J.D. Vance, Peter Till's butt puppet, and Andy Beshear, the son of a governor. I guess I'm more Appalachian than both of these dudes. Then you'll see somebody like George Clooney being like, oh yes, well from the Appalachians. I'm like, dude, cut the bullshit. Your aunt was Rosemary Clooney. The reason he does stuff like want Biden to step down and replace him with whoever at the last minute, and we should have had a mini primary even though that was impossible. When shit goes wrong, he can go to Lake Como. You know, I don't have a summer home in Lake Como that I can go ride the revolution out in. I have to be in it. So of course it matters to me that the 40% of the state of Alabama that's left-leaning, Democratic, liberal, or progressive, however you want to phrase it, that they have proper representation and the rule of law is not thrown out of it. So when they're oppressed and their vote doesn't matter and the governors of these states, they think they can do whatever the hell they please. And I hope to do an episode between now and the November midterms when they're actually in the general elections. But please support Doug Jones. He's the Alabama candidate for governor against Tommy Tuberville, who sucks. And again, this comes back to the media and what do they cover? What do they not cover? He's not from Alabama. His wife's not from Alabama. His kids were not born and raised in Alabama. He has no real connections to the state till he moves there almost as a 50-year-old man to coach Auburn football for about 10 years, and they pay him millions to leave early. They wanted him gone so bad, they paid out his contract of millions to end it early. And this man is going to be the governor of a state he had no ties to until he was in middle age, if not late middle age, and he actually currently lives in Florida. He owns a piece of property in Auburn, but he really lives in Santa Rosa, Florida. And so at best, you're going to have a guy living in Florida on the island of Santa Rosa who drinks pina coladas and enjoys the governor's salary. At worst, he'll actually show up to work and he'll do bad shit. Lobbyists that are giving him campaign cash, whatever they want, he'll give it to them. What will he use to give it to them? He'll gut the education budget. The first place somebody like Tuberville looks is the school budget, and that includes teacher benefits, teacher retirement, school budgets in general, how much money goes to the kids. He'll gut the public education budget and give out either private school vouchers or charter school vouchers, whoever paid him the most through a super PAC or whatever it is, or Alpha Insurance. Maybe they need a tax cut. They'll give him some money. He'll do that. At worst, he will hurt the state in 100 different ways and really run us into the ground. At best, he'll be checked out living on an island in Florida. I predict the worst. I think he may not work full time. You don't have to work as governor full time. You can take a lot of time off. Look at Kay Ivey. She's supposedly been the governor for a decade, and you never see her until it's time to run for re-election. She's hiding under her desk drinking a bottle of hooch or with her lesbian lover or whatever. I mean, who knows what what she does when she's not actually working, which is almost never, because she doesn't agree to debates. She won't hardly do interviews. I don't think she can put two paragraphs together if it's not on a teleprompter or written down in front of her. Tuberville's the same way. If he's more proactive and more conservative and hurts a lot of people, people suffer. And so you'll have a guy who's not from the state, does not care about the residents and citizens of the state of Alabama, doesn't give a shit about them, and yet he'll be in charge of a state he has no real ties to, where he can sit on an island in Florida and he can pass laws that will hurt the millions of students or teachers or citizens who live in that state. 5 million people live in Alabama, and it'll be controlled by a guy who lives in Florida and moved there as a 50-year-old. Does that smell bad to anybody else? Does that smell like a fish? Well, of course it does. Will you see the Alabama media cover it? No, you will not. Does the Alabama Liberal and all the media forms of audio, visual, and text, do we have 1% the reach that Yellowhammer News does? No, we do not. So when you ask things like, well, what can liberals do? I have literally never been approached by anybody big within liberal circles. The DNC has never approached me. Alabama Democratic Party has never approached me. No state Democratic parties have ever approached me. Major liberal groups like the Daily Kos or MoveOn.org have ever approached me, and I've approached them. I've sent them emails. In the case where I can find a phone number, I have called people. I have left voicemails. What is the biggest difference between Democrats and Republicans? And what have you noticed as 15 years of Alabama liberal? What I know for a fucking fact is that if I were a Republican and I were a conservative, I would have been funded by now. I would have gotten Alex Jones money by now. Alex Jones is a goddamn idiot. He's a blowhard. He's an asshole. He's a moron. Is he funnier than I am? No. Is he smarter than I am? Hell fucking no. But if you're on the Republican side, you will get funded. Will go to your PayPal or your Venmo or whatever it is, and they'll put $1 million in that, and they'll get you some funding. Russia can do it. The AI lobby can do it. Crypto lobby can do it. The oil and gas lobby can do it. There are major funds on the Republican side. There's think tanks. There's lobbying groups. Endless. You can't even name all of them. The Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, all of the groups loosely aligned to Project 2025. Stuff like ALEC, stuff like Americans for Prosperity, the Grover Norquist group, the Chamber of Commerce usually gives to Republicans over Democrats. So they are a very well-funded machine, and they look for influencers. They look for bloggers. They look for YouTubers. They look for people that could be useful. If you're a conservative and you start a TikTok channel, eventually you will be funded. I can have Alabama Liberal for 15 years. I've run it as a loss to myself for 15 years. Not one fucking person on the liberal side has approached me for funding. When they say things like, well, Michael Bloomberg's given money and Bill Gates is given money and George Soros has given money, I don't know who they give it to, and maybe they give it to the DNC, and I don't know what they do with it, but they have not built the digital media infrastructure that Republicans have. They have not built that. They have not even attempted to build that. We can be sitting here for years and not be reached. Even in cases where they might try to do that, like Vox Media was perceived as left-leaning. James Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's son, just bought half of Vox Media. Vice News, the so-called liberal equivalent of some of these others, even though I don't think Vice is really that liberal. Its co-founder, Gavin McInnes, is a raven conservative. He helped co-found the Proud Boys, and whatever's left of Vice News has filed for bankruptcy. It is so unbelievably lopsided. Every time that anybody liberal gets a toehold or a foothold or they start climbing up, Republicans will buy the outfit and they will take it over and they will run it in the ground. Alabama Liberal can languish here for 15 years. We can never get liberal funding. We can never get reached by a single member of anybody big in the Democratic circles. Even if we send emails, they do not respond. They do not contact us. And yet I know if I went viral and I had one or two videos get up to over 1 million views, I would be contacted by a Republican, somebody conservative. They may not identify themselves as conservative, but somebody from XYZ Private Equity Capital would contact me and say, we'd love to fund you. How about a $2 million stake for your podcast and your YouTube channel and your blog? How about that? We'll put you on. We'll advertise everywhere. And the second they did and give me that kind of deal, they'd say, and by the way, here's a list of stuff we don't want you to talk about. You're going to tell me that Joe Rogan can get a $100 million deal plus on Spotify? The podcasting market is dominated by conservatives, even though the audience for conservatism nepotism and podcast is smaller than we are, they can get corporate funding, but liberals, we just disappear and go off into the dark and nobody cares. You're going to tell me that that's just random? That's just market forces? Bullshit. Deep down, I think you know better if you're listening to this. When CBS says something like, we're canceling Colbert, it's a purely financial decision. He's number one in the ratings. He's beating The Tonight Show and Jimmy Kimmel. CBS owns that building. They own the Ed Sullivan Theater. He doesn't do man on the street interviews. He doesn't do expensive bits. He's in that studio doing the show. It looks like a much cheaper show to run than The Tonight Show or even Jimmy Kimmel would be. They own the building and he's number one in the ratings in late night. Not to mention, even if by some miracle they actually were losing $40 million, which I don't believe that shit for a second. I think that's Hollywood accounting. You can look up Hollywood accounting. You can see how they can make almost any movie or TV show look unprofitable to justify getting rid of it. Do I think it actually was losing that amount of money over such a long time? No, I don't. I don't for a second believe that. Even people like the Men in Black screenwriters have had to take Sony to the courts, and Sony's like, well, the movie lost money. And they're like, oh, it lost money, and yet you decided to make a whole franchise out of that and make 3 more movies about it. I mean, give me a break. Hollywood accounting can make anything look unprofitable, and they do, so they can screw creators out of profit participation. It's in their best interest to make most of these shows and movies look like they're losing money so they don't have to pay out profit participation deals. But even if that were true and they lost $40 million, for a multi-billion-dollar media company, that is absolutely nothing. And it's good publicity. It's a promotional tool. That's what most of these shows are promotional tools. Anybody who's in a Yellowstone spinoff or a Nickelodeon movie or whatever it is, the entire Paramount conglomerate, they can come on the Late Show and advertise that. So if you're the star of a new CBS show, like we got CSI Boca Raton, NCIS Palm Springs, and Murder in a Nursing Home, all CBS shows are basically the world is a dangerous place, please don't leave your house. In a way, they were right for a conservative takeover because a lot of CBS shows are about scaring the hell out of old people. It's basically the dramatic equivalent of Fox News. So it's a fictionalized, scripted equivalent of Fox News. Around every corner, there's a serial killer. Don't even go anywhere. Go to Crackle Barrel and back. Lock your doors when you get in because you're going to be scared to death. But any Paramount movie, any CBS show, anything at MTV, anything they needed to advertise, that person would go on Colbert and they would get free publicity. And millions of people would watch that through YouTube or whatever else it was. And it's a way to generate publicity. The $40 million loss is worth it for $1 billion in advertising and earned media. Is that ever going to be the case for Byron Allen's lame-ass dated show where comedians come out and they talk about stuff they could have talked about 30 years ago? When you watch Comics Unleashed, which Norm Macdonald hilariously called, he goes, you could not be more leashed. You couldn't talk about anything. The format just sucked. Like you were literally confined by everything. When comics come on that, are they ever going to be able to go viral like they could with The Late Show? Of course not. Nobody's going to watch that because it's so dated. I watched an episode or two. I couldn't tell if it was 5 weeks old or 5 years old. I'm like, did they shoot this in 2005 or 2 weeks ago? You can't tell. Byron Allen likes about that is he's like, oh, it's good that it's so dated because nobody knows when it's on and we can show reruns and syndicate it easily. But is that ever going to have the same earned media as The Late Show? If somebody from a Paramount project wants to come on and advertise, of course not. So I don't believe that the show was losing money. I think they pushed it off the air. It's really about hurting the infrastructure. What kills me is when people say, well, Colbert, he can go on and do a podcast now. Like, The Late Show is this big, huge cultural institution, and the prize is like, now he can go on and do his own podcast. Just like, that's pretty crazy. He'll go from making about $40 million a year or whatever he gets paid to maybe $2 million a year for advertising, and then in between interviews, he'll be like, condoms.com. And it's sad because The Late Show is something that I grew up with, and I think Colbert's last few episodes were great, but it made me sad. Really, the week before the final week was better. The final week of shows was pretty good. There was The Worst of the Late Show. There was Jon Stewart. Steven Spielberg came out there, and this was like a totally clueless interview. Spielberg was just babbling about this movie he wants to promote. He didn't bring a gift. It's like the second to last episode, and he wasn't even acknowledging that Steven's going anywhere. He didn't say, boy, we sure will miss you. I thought, what the hell is wrong with this guy? He's worth $7 billion, and he's so scared of David Ellison, he can't be like, oh, we sure will miss you, Steven. Spielberg should be starting his own goddamn media company, not using the last episodes of The Late Show to come out there and advertise an alien movie me that Universal for him and all this. I thought, what's the matter with you? Like, this was such a lame interview. But the weeks before that were so much better. When all 5 late night hosts came out, great. And Jimmy Kimmel said a lot of what I think Colbert wished he could say. And then the episode after that, an interview with Barack Obama, terrific. The best of them all, David Letterman, the OG, comes back to be interviewed. And the very end, when they had not only thrown chairs off, but he'd been like, good night and good luck, motherfuckers. And they had their hands over their... I thought, this is fantastic. This is what I'm missing from late night. Because in the 90s, I literally would watch, kind of flip back and forth, like a little bit of Leno and Letterman and Bill Maher. And then Conan would come on and I'd watch Conan. But if you think about it, David Letterman has really had the biggest impact of any person ever on late night television. Because he starts late night with David Letterman after The Tonight Show. That show's still on. It's had 4 different co-hosts. Letterman, Conan, Jimmy Fallon, and now Seth Meyers. It's still on the air. So the fact that it's an institution is fantastic. Then comes over to CBS and starts The Late Show with David Letterman. And eventually The Late Late Show. But The Late Late Show has Tom Snyder, Craig Kilborn, Craig Ferguson, who I never really liked. A lot of people liked Craig Ferguson, but I didn't. I thought his monologues were endless. You still see these clips, though, like floating around about Ferguson, and it's be some attractive woman, and it looks like, oh, they just love flirting with him. I'm like, yeah, I bet they do. I bet that guy would get Me Too'd in 2 seconds right now if he still had a talk show, but the era was different back then. But anyway, so you have Craig Ferguson, and then finally James Corden. And so The Late Late Show, The Late Show, and Late Night were all built by David Letterman. So for him to come back on The Late Show, this institution that's existed for 33 years, I'm sure he was bitter about it. I'm sure it hurt him. I like that Colbert had Paul McCartney on to talk about the Ed Sullivan Show and what that meant. Between the Ed Sullivan Show, The Late Show, it's an institution. And so to see these cultural institutions torn down, it does bother me because it basically is seeing Trump try to change the culture so much, because that's what he's really doing. That's the real threat about Trump, is that he's trying to change the culture. He doesn't like things that came before him, and he doesn't really like things that could outlive him. Most narcissists are like that. They don't want to think about anything outlasting them. Mark Maron had that great quote where he's like, a narcissist wants to think the world is going to end when they do. They don't want to think it could possibly go on without them. And I've said variations of that for a long time, but it's true. And I think that's why he wants to change the name of the Kennedy Center. He wants to slap his names on stadiums. He wants to put his name on cash. He's trying to push off The Late Show, which has existed for millennials since we were children. And I mean, this is a cultural institution. He's trying to gut these things that are symbols of what came before him and radically deform and change the culture. He guts $1 billion from PBS and NPR funding. He calls back that. He wants PBS and NPR gone. These are all symptomatic of a tyrant trying to say there was nothing before me, and therefore I will change the culture to my specifications, and it's always been this way. What happens with today's children when they see a guy like that become president? And for somebody like my son, he almost doesn't remember anybody before Trump. Trump took office when he was about 3. So to have him take office for almost his entire life, it really is scary to think, how is he changing the culture in a way? And I mean, he must be to some extent. People used to say, think of the children. They don't say that anymore. They literally think like day to day. Nobody's thinking like, oh, somebody who's 5 years old, what's their life going to be like from now on? And so I'm a little sad to see something like The Late Show go, and I'm sad I never got to take the Colbert Questionnaire. That's something I would have loved to have taken. And I think I'm going to do it right now. I think I'm just going to pretend that I'm on Stephen Colbert's show and I'm taking the Colbert Questionnaire. This is what I would pretty much say if I were taking the Colbert Questionnaire. So they have something like, what's the best sandwich? To me, this is the toughest question. And I know that sounds crazy. The hard questions are quite easy, but this question is the toughest question. What's the best sandwich? I really don't know, because I love sandwiches and it changes all the time. And I like sandwich places. I like Firehouse Subs. I like Earl of Sandwich. I'm going to say a Thanksgiving sandwich, which is turkey, cranberry, dressing, some gravy sometimes, but there's a lot of sandwiches you could go with. Barbecue sandwiches are always great. If you're in Alabama, a place called Moe's Barbecue has a delicious Thanksgiving sandwich on Thursdays. It's like their special sandwich of the day, but they've also got a good barbecue sandwich just in general. Earl of Sandwich, if you're anywhere that has one of those. I've seen them in both Orlando and here in LA area. There's a lot of places you can get a good sandwich. What's one thing that you own that you really should throw out? Just about everything. I keep things way too long. Phones too long, cars too long, clothes too long. So there's almost nothing I shouldn't throw out. It's more, what should I keep? But I keep things for a long time. I guess I'm very sustainable in that way, and that I don't really change things a lot. What is the scariest animal? Well, the mosquito kills more people than anything else. But in a weird way, I went to the LA Zoo, and one of the strangest animals I've ever seen is the anteater. It looks like an alien. It's like a fuzzy alien, like if Alf was on four legs and this thing was jet black, so you could not see it that well. It kept dodging in and out of the shadows, and it had a very long tongue. It could get to ants, but probably the scariest animal would be a tiger. If I were face to face with a tiger, I would shit my pants. Like if it were out of the zoo or whatever, because a tiger just has such an insane look. Like the eyes, the orange, like it looks something so out of nature. It looks like a monster. They think, oh, the tiger's camouflaged. I'm like, oh, what fucking planet is an environment that's green and brown and it's got bright orange stripes? It almost looks like something that shouldn't exist. And so the fact that you'd be face to face with this insane looking animal, and the face of one is insane looking, I think it would have to be maybe a tiger. Apples or oranges? I would say oranges. He always says apples. Like he encourages them to pick apples. But an orange is so much better because the juice of an orange, I almost can't believe so many people picked apples instead of oranges. Have you ever asked someone for their autograph? I have many times. I used to go to Broadway shows and I would wait outside the theater for the people to come out and sign playbills. So I've gotten like Jessica Chastain's autograph, Hugh Jackman's autograph. There's been a lot of people over the years. Also something you can do, and I don't know if they still do this, but when I lived in New York, SNL at that time, when the show was over, the cast would come out and some of them would leave immediately. They would run to a taxi or a black SUV and they would go, but some would come out and they would take photos and sign autographs. Andy Samberg was so nice, and he took photos with me and my wife, and he signed something she had, like a piece of paper, so she has his autograph. Seth Meyers, people were waiting. He comes out. He hosted Update at that time. He waves at the crowd once and then immediately ducks into a black SUV. And everybody's like, oh shit. Everybody thought he was going to come out and talk to us, but he really did not. What do you think happens when we die? I think it's lights out. Permanent darkness. I don't think there's anything else. I would be surprised if there was anything else. Permanent sleep. You lose consciousness, you never regain it, and you're dead. The question of an afterlife was created because most people couldn't face this. Most animals don't have to face this. Part of having higher consciousness is we're able to imagine things and create things. For people like myself who have written fiction before, anybody who's written like a Lord of the Rings or a Dune type book, I think they know that it's too easy to make up mythology. It's easy for some people to create fantasy and sci-fi. It's a little too easy to create that for me to believe the afterlife is real. I hope it is, I guess, but also if it's not, we'll never know the difference. So I don't know if it matters. And I think it's more important to make this life as good as it can be, to do what you want to do on this earth, which you know is here. Favorite action movie? I think Seven Samurai is the best action movie ever made. I don't know if it'd be my favorite one. I know my son and I enjoyed watching Speed, and Speed is a perfect movie for kids that love car chases because the whole movie is almost a car chase. We like the Mission Impossible movies. The most recent one where Tom Cruise is in the yellow airplane trying to save the world. I mean, the audience is hanging with him. They're right with him. So I like Mission Impossible movies and Speed, but the best one is Seven Samurai. Favorite smell could be almost anything. The way women smell is great. The way food smells is great. I have a lot of favorite smells. I guess delicious food. There's nothing that sticks out in my mind. Most smells don't turn me off. They're not that bad. Least favorite smell would be smoke. I have a severe smoke allergy. I have my entire life. I hate smoke. I don't even like being around it. Cigarette smoke is probably my least favorite. Anything organic smells better to me than cigarette smoke. Like even somebody pooping literally doesn't smell as bad to me as somebody puffing up right in front of me. Most used app on your phone would be Waze. You get one song to listen to for the rest of your life. What is it? I would pick something by Rachmaninoff. I would pick something that's classical music, and a pop song or rock song, I would get sick of it. Something by Rachmaninoff you could put in the background and just have it there in the background, and it's there and makes you feel certain emotions, but it's not overpowering. So that's probably the only thing I couldn't get sick of. What number am I thinking of? Colbert's answer was 3. Then you have stuff that I think was replaced or added over time, like exercise. Is it worth it? I don't exercise that much. I always feel better when I do, but like if you swim or walk, I mean, you will feel better and it's better for your mental health. So it probably is worth it, but I don't always do it. Things are a lot of times worth it that I don't like doing. You know, eating a salad over a steak is worth it, but I don't do that a lot. Window or aisle? Window for certain. And I'm pretty tall, so definitely window. Cats or dogs? I don't really care. We had a big yard in Alabama. We could keep both of them outside, so both of them are good. I don't dislike either one of them, but I guess I would say dogs. Earliest memory? I feel like I can remember being in a crib. It was a crib by the wall in my room. Flat or sparkling for water? I would say flat. Sparkling water defeats the whole purpose of drinking water. I love drinking cold water. I drink a lot of water every day, and I think that's one of the only things keeping me healthy. Describe the rest of your life in 5 words. I'll leave that to you. I'm not going to answer that, but I'll leave that to you. It would have been nice to take the Colbert Questionnaire. I would have loved to have taken that Colbert Questionnaire. I have been to both the Colbert Report at Comedy Central and the Late Show when David Letterman hosted it. So when I lived in New York City, David Letterman was hosting the Late Show, and my mom was visiting, and we went to the Late Show and got tickets, and it was an experience. You go in and they seat you down. Eventually they give you a break, and you go out to Angelo's Pizza and get some pizza. I think we paid for it. I don't think we got anything to be there. And then Colbert hosted by the Daily Show. So there was the Daily Show studio and the Colbert Report studio. I went to both of them, and Jon Stewart, after the Daily Show, would come answer questions, anybody who had questions. So yeah, I've got a lot of late night nostalgia. I've been to most of these shows in person as an audience member. It would have been great to be a Colbert guest at a certain point. We're both two big liberals, even though he's very Catholic and religious, and I'm definitely not religious. It still would have been a great experience to connect with another Southern liberal on television. And something I've said before is you'll get everything you want in life when you no longer want it. So if there's ever something you really want, eventually you'll either get it when you don't care about it that much anymore, or you'll lose interest in getting it. So at that point of Real Time, I'm like, damn, I would love to be a guest. I watched Real Time from when it premiered all the way up until about 2020. I mean, I'm such a fan. And then you lose being a fan. At this point, I wouldn't watch Bill Maher if you paid me money. Like, I think he's an embarrassment. I can't believe he's still on the air, and all the people that I really loved, they're all getting pushed off the air. But I also can believe it. The powers that be, they want his message out there, and they don't want the message that I really love. They don't want that out there. As I'm talking about who gets funded and who doesn't, and who gets platformed and who doesn't, it's not random. There's a certain agenda that they want out there. Even YouTube. If you're a liberal and you make YouTube videos, you might become Brian Tyler Cohen. But since the algorithms have shifted in the last couple years, Alabama liberal videos, some of them that would have had 1,000 views a few years ago, now they might get 20 views. The last 10 videos I've made, I think the average has been like 7 views, 15 views. It's pathetic. And it's not really because the content has changed that much. It's because the algorithms have shifted. I talked about the right-wing media takeover. Well, of course, Elon Musk buying Twitter and changing it to X, that's had a huge impact on the tweets that you produce and who goes out there. He shifted the algorithms. He deplatformed the liberals and amplified the conservative voices. I know that he did this. I can see tweets I sent before he took it over reaching 1,000 people, and now since he's taken it over, they reach 5 people. Same thing for YouTube under the current more conservative bent of that platform. Probably the same thing for TikTok now that the Ellisons own it. These things are not a coincidence. So I would have enjoyed at one point being on Bill Maher's show. Today, I don't care. Like, I would have killed to be on that show today. I don't give a shit. So it's one of those things where I got what I wanted in that I no longer care to be on there anymore. You've lost interest in it completely. And over the last 15 years, a lot has changed. I mean, I've had kids in that time period. I've gotten married in that time period. I've changed from Alabama to New York to Minnesota to LA in that time period. So you're moving around the country. Things are changing in a personal capacity, but at a professional level, Alabama liberal is the exact same today almost as it was, which is most people don't know it exists. And I'm trying to think of new ways to change that. I've started adding political cartoons to the website. I don't really know what to do, but now that I know, a lot of my media heroes are getting pushed off. The media market has become so saturated with celebrity podcasts. Celebrity podcasts have become dime a dozen because every aspect of celebrity is now being commodified. Celebrities have all these side businesses. Ryan Reynolds has got a soccer team, mobile telephone company, and his own alcohol company. All celebrities have alcohol, fashion, their own makeup line. They've all got these side hustles. They've all got podcasts now, and then they advertise things. Half the time it might be one of their own companies or something that they have a partnership with. So celebrities are just hustling every aspect of their lives. And the last one was celebrities hanging out. So now we get to sit in on their hangouts. So when Dak Shepard and Will Arnett and Jason Bateman and Ted Danson, and I like all of these guys, I'm not dissing them, but when they're sitting around talking to people, when Bill Maher drags somebody who doesn't like him into his basement so he can puff weed in their face and drink alcohol and get sloppy drunk and make inappropriate comments, this is what it would feel like if we were just sitting in his house listening to him. And you can now watch that, and he can sell ads on that. That celebrities can now commodify just hanging out, just being around each other. Yeah, that is different. That hasn't been around for a long time, but it just shows you that they've commodified every aspect of their existence. Some of the has-been and washed up ones, they have OnlyFans pages. Now they're doing pornography. Soon celebrities will sell their own sex tapes, and eventually they'll put their colonoscopies online. They will have sponsored colonoscopies, and they'll get paid tens of thousands of dollars to get a colonoscopy, tie that to their own green juice line somehow. It just shows that everything is commodified in a way. And when you have people with some integrity and some respect, people you like, and they're getting pushed out, that makes Alabama Liberals platform perhaps more vital than it ever would have been otherwise. And I guess I need to get it together and get it out there more, because it's a voice of comfort for the few people that do listen to it and do enjoy it. They look at it and say, yeah, these are dark times. And I'm glad that I have any place to go where I feel sane. I saw that over and over again with Mark Maron's podcast when it ended, and The Late Show when it ended. People said, this was a comfort to me. And I was glad to have this, because I feel like the world's gone crazy, and this is somebody who isn't crazy, and I can listen to them and feel better. And I guess what I'm saying is, but I'm just glad to have your support. The people who have listened to this, I'm glad to have your support. It's been 15 years that I wouldn't take back, and I hope you've gotten something out of it. And thanks for listening, everybody. Stay tuned for the next episode, because I will have a next episode. Unlike all these other guys I've been talking about, I'm not going anywhere.